It's time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, "By George, I think he's got it." Now, here's George.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on in to another podcast by George. Got a special show today. Big news, actually. ABC 2020, the big news magazine show that everybody knows about, had a real in-depth look at the Jody Huisentruit case just this past Friday. And our guest, Scott Fuller, was involved in that. And I want to bring up a little picture here just because I love showing Jody. There's Jody Huisentruit, missing since the summer of 1995. And our guest today, he's an old buddy, he's an old pal. He's been on the show several times here to talk about this particular case. And it is Scott Fuller of FindJody.com. Now, for folks that may not know, Scott has spent more than 15 years as head of programming for terrestrial radio stations in Maine, Wyoming, and Minnesota. He's currently working up at KAUS AM FM, Austin, Minnesota, where he's overseen on-air operations since 2009. Scott began podcasting in 2003, but in recent years, he's conducted in-depth investigations of high-profile cold cases in several states throughout various ongoing podcast projects, including the 1995 disappearance of Jody Huisentruit. He joined FindJody.com in January of 2020. So let's bring him in here, get him up to where he is, equivalent size. There he is, and we're talking to him from home. And right off the top, I got to thank you for doing this, Scott. Thanks for coming on another podcast by George.
Always good to talk to you.
Yeah. So, I want to start off maybe by bringing up this news release. Now, this was what ABC had to say before the special aired. 2020 investigates the mystery behind a young anchor woman who vanished before dawn. That was the name of it, Vanished Before Dawn, which is kind of a cool name. And here's what the text says, and I'll bring Scott in and kind of get his reaction to this. For over 26 years, authorities tried to locate Jody Huisentruit, a 27-year-old anchor woman who vanished early one morning before heading into work up in Mason City, Iowa. And everybody that watches my show, man, we talk about this all the time. 2020, with reporting by co-anchor Amy Robach, explores surprising new leads in the case. In collaboration with investigative journalist and committee films producer Maria Oz, 2020 features exclusive extensive access to the Mason City Police Department and the lead investigator on Huisentruit's case, Terrence Prochaska. Am I saying that correctly, Scott?
I think he pronounces it Prohaska, which is
okay.
Spelled Prochaska.
Okay, so the silent CH.
Mm-hmm.
Well, before we get too further into that, let's talk about this right off the top. Now, I know you were a part of this show, and that's good. But they talk about surprising new leads. I guess, every word means something. I talk about this a lot on my podcast. I mean, we're both trained journalists. Were these leads new, and were they surprising?
The new leads they have in the show, one was a lead that came in to find Jody in the fall of 2020. There was a tip that we had gotten about a freezer that was buried somewhere in Iowa. And the tipster and the landowner are very good friends. They decided they wanted to know what's in this freezer. And before they were going to dig it up in the spring, they contacted Find Jody. And there's no evidence that I'm aware of that freezer is Jody linked specifically, which is something they don't mention in the 2020 special. Something I told 2020, something I've told police, that there's no reason to think that Jody's in that freezer or anything related to her case is buried in that field in Iowa. But being television, I think they were interested to get that on film, and police took that lead seriously, because if it's not Jody related, it could be related to any number of other unsolved cases in that part of the country. So they went out there and they dug for about 4 hours. Question I've gotten a lot about the freezer since the special aired, because it's left as sort of an open-ended question, is what was in the freezer. And to the best of my knowledge, the freezer was not located. I don't know that for sure. As the special mentioned, the police kind of came in and blocked everybody off the location and then left. But I have not heard anything that would answer the question, what was in the freezer? In fact, I think, to the best of my knowledge, again, they didn't find the freezer that they were looking for with that lead.
Well, you know me, Scott does know me. I'm a cynic. I'm a skeptic. And when I saw this, I thought, oh God, this reminds me of that Rivaldo Rivera thing where they had Al
Mm,
Capone's vault, and
right.
they opened that up and there was nothing there. And I remember that very clearly. And the question back then was that in good faith? I mean,
Mm.
did Geraldo know that there was nothing there? Did that news crew know that that was uh, maybe not a hoax, but that there was just nothing to be found? And I kind of wondered that about the freezer. And the other thing, now, if we continue on to read this, and I've highlighted the portions here for the viewers that I was particularly interested in, the report includes, for the first time, Prohaska's comments about his work on the case years after it first began, and takes cameras on a ride along tracing Huisentruit's steps the night before her disappearance. Well, that would be very interesting to go on the ride along. But again, I think about people like you, and I can't overemphasize this enough. Scott spent a lot of his adult life now looking into these things and into this case for Jody. This guy's been with that police department. He's talked several times, not a lot, I don't think. But I mean, did he say anything that hasn't been heard before?
They would have been his first comments in sort of a long form, like what was aired. What wasn't revealed in the special very clearly at all is that he made all of those comments that you saw in the special, I believe, in 2016. So any remarks that he made were about 5 years old. And there was one new thing that he said that caught my attention. It was kind of a small thing, but there have been long rumored to have been found beer cans in Jody's sink area of her apartment. And Terrence Prohaska did confirm that, state it as fact, that there were beer cans and some wine glasses found in the sink area. I don't know that that's significant at all. The crime itself appears to happen outside of her apartment. There's always been a question, who was the last person in her apartment? Was there somebody there possibly that Monday night that she was abducted into Tuesday? There's no evidence to believe that either. But it was just, there wasn't a whole lot new in the 2020 special when it comes to facts. But that would be one of the new small things that the lead investigator on Jody's case is stating as a certainty, that these rumored beer cans were in fact in Jody's sink. Aside from that, it was an interesting insight into Terrence Prohaska and some rare long form access, I suppose. But even the footage itself was not new, and that was not, I didn't feel that was made very clear in the special at all.
No. Well, okay, let's talk beer cans in the sink, because when you say that, Scott, it makes me think of that longtime acquaintance of hers, that older friend that was someone that was known to be at parties and hang out with her and that type of thing. What was the coverage on him about, and was he even mentioned in connection with those beer cans?
Not in connection with the beer cans in the special. There wasn't a whole lot of John Van Cise in the 2020 special. I think my theory on the reason for that is that's been done so much in every special that's ever aired on Jody. So I think they were looking for different angles. I think it's tough to cover this case without mentioning John Van Cise, fair or not. But they did mention him, but they quickly moved on to sort of other things. The beer cans in the sink, to me, could be significant. They come from inside her apartment, but again, the abduction occurs outside of the apartment. If somebody who was inside the apartment wanted to harm Jody, they probably wouldn't wait for her to leave if they're already inside the apartment with her. But maybe it's a visitor that she had the last evening or the 2 evenings before. One thing about the beer cans in the sink, and Jody kept a relatively tidy apartment, but she was very busy on Monday. So this could have been beer cans or wine glasses from Sunday. And then Monday, she was wall to wall with work and then the chamber golf tournament. And she may not have had time to even clean up the kitchen area. That could be possible too.
Well, let's use this photo as a means or a way to take us back, because, and Scott and I are familiar with this case. I mean, he knows it up one side and down the other. A lot of my viewers do. They know a lot about this case as well. But this is going out around the world where a lot of people may not. Now, this photo that you're looking at, Scott, that I brought up, I found this on the internet. The photos from the investigation from the crime scene that I've seen are these old grainy black and whites and crappy photos. I came across this. What is this? Is this a recreation, or where did this photo come from?
That's a recreation from the Up and Vanished special, I believe, that aired a couple of years ago. That is not that is Jody's car, and it's parked in the same sort of way that that it would have been parked. When I say it's Jody's car, it's her model car. It's not her specific car. We went out and found her car, which is still in existence and it's actually in great shape. This was a recreation done for the special, and you mentioned that critical thinking, George. It's out there on the internet, this photo, and this photo has been sent to me many times. People are investigating little clues in this picture here. It's not real. This is a recreation. Okay. And if you think about it, in 1995, clearly this is taken from a drone. Yes. And that would not have been possible in 1995. So little things like that are frustrating with this case as people conflate theory and recreation with the actual events.
Well, again, take us back and just give us the fundamentals of this for our viewers that may not be aware. She's a television anchor in Mason City. She's got an apartment there, some distance from her station. She gets up early in the morning, running late, and walks out of her apartment, and what's left behind is pretty similar to that recreated photo. But other than that, vanished without a trace. Yeah,
some of the items there in the recreated photo would have been dragged in sort of a line. You see where the front bumper is in the recreation photo there. It would appear from the evidence that Jody was attacked right by the driver's side door there, and then was dragged around the car and down through the median to the right of the photo, the recreation photo. And that's what the evidence suggests happened. Now, that photo that you're showing right there, that's an actual crime scene photo.
Yes.
From 1995. Yeah, Jody never arrived at work. All of this case pretty much happens in the parking lot there. There is never, which is remarkable if you think about this, George, there's never been one clue found in relation to Jody's case that is known or confirmed clue anywhere but that apartment parking lot. That one area where there is where the case starts and ends when it comes to evidence in Jody's case. That's, I think, what's hurting any prosecution is something else has to be found. There are items missing from that parking lot that we know she would have had, like a handbag has never been found. I don't believe her wallet was ever found. And obviously at this point, her remains being found would help in the prosecution too. But this case really evidentiarily is exactly where it was in 1995.
Well, I want to continue here to read this and then get to the next part of this, because this is something that you and I have talked about, and it's a head scratcher. It says it contains the first national TV interview with Tony Jackson. Tony Jackson, a serial rapist whose name has been associated with the case since 1998, despite the fact that he's been cleared by police, and he denies any involvement in Huisentruit's disappearance. I've got, where did I put him? Here he is. This is what the news release, again, the information from ABC said. And again, identifies him very clearly as a serial rapist. And the reason that they're able to do that, there's no alleging when it comes to this guy.
Correct. Yeah. He received a life sentence, I believe, for a series of rapes in Minneapolis in 1997. So he is never getting out. And this would be a significant interview. This was interesting to watch what little footage they showed of Tony Jackson on the special. He denies being involved in Jody's case. He denies any associations. There was very very what you would expect regardless. But he's asked about Caroline Lowe on our Find Jody team, did some work with WCCO about a rap rhyme, and you can research more on that at findjody.com.
About a what? What's that?
A rap rhyme. So
okay.
Caroline Lowe was approached by a cellmate of Jackson's at a different prison, who said to Caroline that Tony Jackson had confessed in the form of a rap lyric, and the lyric included the words "stiffen around Tiffin." So she went to Tiffin, Iowa with WCCO and cadaver dogs and police, and nothing was found. Basically, nothing was found there. But there's always been that lingering question about the rap rhyme. We've always had some lingering questions about Tony Jackson when it comes to how quickly he was ruled out.
Yeah.
In this case. There is no evidence that we're aware of that places Tony Jackson at the scene. There's an eyewitness account of somebody seeing somebody driving away quickly as they were jogging by the apartment unit that morning. and almost running them over. But it could be anybody. Tony Jackson, I think, is a just like anybody else, he's innocent of Jody Huisentruit's case until proven guilty. But it seems to me he's a bad dude, and he lived 2 blocks from the television station where Jody worked. And there have been reports over the years that he knew Jody and sought out Jody in a bar in Mason City one night from a friend of his, told to find Jody that. So we've had remaining questions about Tony Jackson, but there are a dozen people that we have remaining questions about. The 2020 crew went in to interview Tony Jackson, and that's a good get. And so they made that as a centerpiece of their special that aired on Friday night.
And that's interesting because I know he had agreed to do an interview one time and people had high hopes for that. And then he backed out of it. The thing that's interesting to me about that guy, like you mentioned, he's a serial criminal. This is a bad dude. But he's Minnesota connected and he's Iowa connected, and he kind of triangulates. Did he come out of the Chicago area? I can't remember. This Tony Jackson guy. Okay. So, and Tiffin, of course, that's a suburb of Iowa City, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's on the way on the I-80 corridor to I-35 to Mason City to Minneapolis, like a lot of conspiracy theories. I mean, this is very interesting. And who the hell would make up a rhyme that includes Tiffin, Iowa in it unless they were someone that would obsess about a location or place? So you look at this guy and you think, oh, wow. But then I look at him, Scott, and I think, all right, he's on record with these other crimes. He's convicted. Why would he not come forward about this? I mean, it wouldn't harm him any. He probably doesn't have a heart of gold, certainly, but you look at it and think, well, if this guy's going to admit to, or, be convicted of these other crimes, wouldn't he step forward here? But no dice.
Well, I mean, that's a good point. I've never seen him admit to the rapes. I've read an account where he admitted to a private investigator that he committed the rapes. And Maria Oz on 2020 on Friday doesn't show that relevant part of the interview if he talks about the rapes or not. She says he didn't deny the rapes to me, but does deny Jody. Who's didn't deny is not necessarily the same thing as assuming responsibility for the rapes. So he's had a hard time speaking honestly and openly about the crimes that we know for sure he committed. And it's very possible he has nothing to do with Jody Huisentruit, but because he's lied so much over the years, it's difficult to take his word for it too. I would love to be able to say, oh, there's a denial and we can move on. He did say one thing in the 2020 special. He denied ever having been to Tiffin, Iowa, which, as you mentioned with that geography, George, is difficult for me to believe at face value because of the I-80 corridor there. He's very familiar with southern and central Iowa, so it's possible he's never been to Tiffin. But that was also a new statement from him. Having played high school basketball in the area as he did, it would not be hard to go innocently to Tiffin, Iowa. So that statement from him stood out, that he's never even been there.
Man, I was not aware of any of that. This is very interesting, and you had to be watching or looking at this very closely. One of the things that could have come out of this, it sounds like it didn't, was why was he ruled out so quickly? You really didn't get an answer for that.
Well, police have given a list. They issued a press release based on, I think it said polygraphs and interviews and some other things that they have ruled him out. And I don't doubt the work that they did on Tony Jackson, or Prohaska himself said on the special that he had cleared Tony Jackson. He also said something interesting, did Prohaska, on the special. He said that Tony Jackson didn't match any DNA that they have related to Jody's case. I don't know what that is. But as far as I'm aware, there are 2 pieces of physical evidence in Jody's case: the palm print that was somewhere on the car and a single hair that was found somewhere at the scene. I don't know if the DNA they're referring to has to do with the hair. I sort of doubt that. So from inside or outside the apartment, and this would be a hopeful thing if police have this and have never just publicly disclosed it, if they have some offender DNA, that opens the door to this case being solved at any moment. That would be great. Prohaska saying that Jackson or anybody else had been ruled out because of DNA, obviously jumped off the screen because I don't know what DNA he's referring to.
Let me bring this back up on screen here because this is something that I'm not that familiar with. Again, I'm not as close to this as Scott is, and it's the highlighted portion, this end of this news release. The 2-hour program includes exclusive interviews with Crystal Doolittle and Scarlett Fleshner, who opened up for the first time about how theories falsely linked Huisentruit's disappearance to their father's death in Mason City just 3 months prior, and new interviews with members of Find Jody, a team made up of journalists, a podcaster, that's Scott, and a former police commander. Okay, 3 months prior. I'm thinking 3 months prior to this 2020 broadcast. Are they talking about that older male friend of Jody's? Who are they talking about here?
No, they're talking about Billy Pruitt, who was a friend of Jody's, sort of a bar acquaintance, just someone that Jody had met in the 6 months or so the year prior to her disappearance. And in April of 1995, Bill Pruitt was found dead in his home outside of Mason City, Iowa. And there was a lot of speculation about Billy Pruitt's death at the time, including by Jody herself. She was concerned. She told friends that there seemed to be something else going on. Authorities ruled that as a suicide and sort of moved on. And then Jody disappeared 3 months later. And only after the fact did people sort of say, well, that's, Billy died in a suspicious way. And now Jody has disappeared. And they began to link the two together. And in any town the size of Mason City, Iowa, you can find degrees of connection, people working with people who are family members. And so that has been done pretty much ever since when it comes to Billy Pruitt and Jody Huisentruit. One of the theories being that Billy's death was drug related and Jody was investigating that connection for television, and that got her killed after he had been killed. This is totally baseless, totally without fact. Jody was not that kind of journalist, for one thing. She was a Good Morning America sort of, daytime. She was very good at developing a connection with the audience, that warm feeling to start your day. But she was not an investigative journalist, and she had no desires to be an investigative journalist. She was not looking into anything related to Billy Pruitt's death. The Billy Pruitt's daughters, who were in the special, hired a private investigator named Don Sasma, who I met with probably a year and a half ago now. And he, I didn't know what he was going to say when we met. I didn't know what his theory was or where his work had taken him. It was amazing. He laid out over 2 or 3 hours to me how Billy Pruitt was not murdered. He had not committed suicide. He accidentally shot himself inside his home. And that's a theory, that third possibility we all forget about. But people accidentally kill themselves in firearms related incidents. And he convinced me that's what happened to Billy Pruitt. And so we then put out a podcast episode to try to put that one to bed, because the daughters who were on the 2020 special have been having people calling their house, and they've had to read all these terrible things about their late father online. And so I'm glad that 2020 took this route as well, because hopefully that will put to bed this speculation about some kind of drug conspiracy with Billy Pruitt and Huisentruit. Just didn't happen.
Yeah, just didn't happen. You mentioned a private investigator. What about this other fellow that you and I talked about the last time we got together? I did a show here. He said that he had some new information and was getting ready to release it or reveal it or whatever. Was that covered at all on the show? Was there anything to that?
I think you're referring to Steve Ridge. No, Steve was on the 2020 show. No.
Okay, good. Well, I just wanted to make sure because I had somebody, a friend of the show, ask me about that. I didn't think anything had necessarily become of that. Okay, I wanted to a couple of things here, just some housekeeping. I want to make sure that people are aware of these billboards. We mentioned this the last time that you and I had talked, Scott. These were going up around the Mason City area, and it's kind of maybe the foundation of this particular episode of Podcast by George. This 2020 show, you could look at it as a cynic and a naysayer and a negative person and say, well, they didn't find anything. Jody's still missing. There's nothing news here. But for somebody like you, any coverage, any exposure, particularly on a platform like 2020, has to be rewarding. You have to be gratified by that because you want to do exactly what this billboard is encouraging people to do. Find that one person maybe that knows a little something, that maybe watched that on television and might come forward and bring closure to all of this.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, that's, as a group of volunteers, any media appearance we pretty much have to agree to. We have to say yes, because it's our mission is to keep Jody's face and her case out there in the hopes that somebody knows something. National exposure tends to produce a lot of less quality tips, but in there's always a couple of good ones. And already since Friday, we've received a couple of very interesting tips. We haven't taken them far enough yet to know what they would mean, but it would all be worth it. All of this would all be worth it when that day comes, when that one lead can be investigated, that finally leads to Jody's family getting some closure and the community getting some answers in this case.
And we talked about this the last time that you were on too, that it might be somebody with a screw loose that got infatuated and did this and is local and just went back into the woodwork and has yet to be found. But the thing of it is, everybody knows somebody. And,
Mhm.
there's a likelihood that somebody has knowledge on this case. And people shouldn't give up hope because, and you know this all too well, Scott, because this isn't the only case that you look at. These cold cases can and sometimes are solved years, even decades after the crime.
That's true. And the advancement of technology every year is making those cases much more solvable. Amazing things. 40, 50-year-old cold cases are solved in this last year. For Jody, yeah, it's at this point, it is somebody knowing something, making a link for police that they can connect to whatever they already have in the file. Find Jody takes anonymous tips as well if you're not comfortable reaching out to the police. But tell somebody. Just make sure somebody knows that seemingly insignificant thing that you know about your uncle or your ex-boyfriend or ex-husband or whatever the situation might be. Relationships change, and where people might have been fearful or intimidated or in not a great position to come forward with their information about Jody 10, 20 years ago, that can change. And that's why we keep doing what we're doing. We're hopeful that somebody has some information that for whatever reason they didn't know they had or may not have been comfortable sharing, and to come forward now.
And I'm putting these photos up of Jody because I just, I love to look at them. And she lives on in the memories of everyone at this age, at this time, because there just
Mhm.
was no tomorrow, apparently, for Jody Huisentruit. And Scott's a broadcaster. I mean, he's got an eye on the industry. I mean, she was an up and comer. I mean, people believed that there were great things ahead for Jody. And of course, that was all taken away by someone. And again, pleading with anyone that may have maybe something they don't even think is that significant
Sure.
to come forward and share that, because it could be the lead that breaks this case. Well, Scott, before we leave you here today, maybe to wrap up a little bit, now this special that just aired on ABC, what's your sense of that overall? We talked about exposure is always good, but was there something in that you think might actually move this along a little bit?
Well, you never know. You never know what somebody's seeing, some uh, bit from the show or photo from the show or whatever. You never know what that might mean to them and what that might trigger in their brain. I thought I thought it was well shot as a piece of footage, as a film. It was quite in depth for Find Jody. We spent the last year with the people from 2020, and they interviewed me for the footage that you see in the show. They interviewed me for 12 hours over 2 days over the last year. So it's a big time commitment, and I'm glad it's done. I'm glad it's aired. So it's out there for people to watch on Hulu. And really, what we're hoping is that it reaches just that one person who finds something at an estate sale or goes through their uncle's attic or their photo album, their family pictures, and sees a white van or a white truck or whatever it might be. Just think about Jody's case and the facts that we have posted at Find Jody. Think about those things in relation to your own family experience, your own experiences with exes, friends that you used to work with in the Mason City area or the southern Minnesota area, people that you've never forgotten about, but that when you know the facts of Jody's case could possibly make sense. That's how this case is going to be broken at this point, is with technology and then somebody coming forward and finally saying something about what they either didn't know they knew or they were scared to come forward with before.
I think that's an excellent point. I don't want to get into the gory details and histories of serial killers, but this type of obsession that would cause this, those people are likely to keep little snippets of something.
Mhm.
They might have a photograph or a recording or something like that. And again, if you're a distant relative going through an estate sale or something like that Scott mentioned, and you see this, you think, what the hell? Why would
Sure.
they have photos or clippings of not a very well known, because she was young and an up and comer, Mason City, Iowa television morning news anchor? Why would that be in their collection of stuff?
Hmm.
Well, that might be just the kind of thing that people like Scott Fuller is looking for.
Could be her handbag has never been found. I don't believe her wallet was found. There would have been jewelry. Jody had was very into accessories, so she had. If you look at any picture of Jody Huisentruit where you can see her rings, you can see that she wore the same two or three rings pretty consistently on one hand or the other. Those would be something that, if were found, could be significant. But really, it doesn't have to be a put together case in your mind for you to come forward with this information. We have a lot of information on Jody's case. The Mason City Police obviously have a lot of information on Jody's case. Make sure that somebody knows about that, because even if it just doesn't make sense to you, the big picture, you never know what it means to us or what it means to the Mason City Police Department. So that's my big encouragement to everybody when a special airs or when Jody's case gets any media coverage is to go through the website, go through findjody.com. If anything jumps out to you in your personal life and your personal experience, bring it to us or bring it to the police.
That's great. That's well said. And it's findjody.com, folks. That's the place that you want to go. I mean, that's very easy. Just pass along that information. You may think, well, I know some things about this. They know all that stuff. That you may know something they don't. I mean, share it.
Mhm.
Get it out there. It can't hurt. Redundancy is not an issue here. I mean,
Right.
go ahead and
Don't worry about
participate in it.
don't worry about wasting anyone's time at this point. You know, it's
Yeah.
going to be that one thing. It's going to be that one tip that finally comes in, and when we see it, we're going to know it, or when the cops see it, they're going to know it. That's what it's going to take. And just imagine, it's a small effort. If you're considering coming forward, it's a small thing that you can do, and it would mean the world to Jody's family and the community and the people who have been working on this case far longer than I have. Becomes a big part of a person's life, and if you can bring that closure to Jody's family while there's still time to do that, that'd be great.
That's great. That's a great closer. He's a pro, folks. That's Scott Fuller. And the reason he's a pro, he's currently up at KAUSAM FM in Austin, Minnesota. He oversees on air operations there. He has since 2009. He started podcasting back when it was beginning, basically,
Mhm.
in 2003. And of course, he's kind of the head honcho here, kind of helping out with this findjody.com. Scott, as always, pal, thanks again for everything that you've done. And thanks for coming on this podcast by George Live Line.
Thanks for having me, George. Anytime.
Yeah. And folks, if you like Podcast by George, if you like these kind of interviews with folks like Scott Fuller, if you like the efforts to keep the story of Jody Huisentruit alive, please go to podcastbygeorge.com and sign up. It's free. You can subscribe to the show on any number of platforms. Just go there, click subscribe, the follow buttons on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, even Amazon audio and video, places like that have Podcasts by George. You'll get notified of each new show. And we'd really like for you to do that so that we can spread the word here for things like the Jody Huisentruit disappearance. Folks, that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is, and there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.